What's up, guys? Aaron Feely with White Sox Daily back again. Final episode of the week, and we've got some interesting news here regarding the Chicago White Sox. We'll go ahead and jump right into it, including, as you see right there on the bottom of the screen, Chris Getz dropping an interesting quote over the weekend, or sorry, over the night last night as he was in the press conference. And when asked about potential further additions to the Chicago White Sox, he mentioned that they are looking at the outfield market. We're talking to other ball clubs, and from what we understand, there are still guys out there. That is an interesting bit of phrasing from Chris Getz, because not only the we're talking to other ball clubs, but the from what we understand, there are still guys out there is quite the combination back to back, because it implies that he's not necessarily talking to free agents at this point. Very clearly a hint that they are exploring the trade market right now, and we've already heard a lot of connection to Nick Castellanos for the Chicago White Sox. The Phillies are trying to dump him. The White Sox might be willing to take on the entirety of his salary if they can also get a prospect in the trade as well. It just seems like a really solid matchup there between two ball clubs. And another interesting name that has come to light is Wilyer Abreu of the Boston Red Sox, who has had two really solid seasons to this point. And Boston is obviously, they were already in the market earlier on this offseason when the Chicago White Sox were receiving a bunch of calls about several of their catching prospects. They've been in the market to add at catcher for some time now, and Abreu is a guy that they are trying to move off of right now, despite being a really solid young right fielder. A guy that, to this point, back-to-back seasons with around 20 home runs. He hit 18 in 2024. He hit 22 last year. A guy that's hit around 250 both of the last 2 years. He hit 316 that first season when he was called up and played in like a quarter of the season. He has played spectacular defensively as well for them in the last 3 years since being called up to their major league roster. A guy that I think would really be a massive benefit to the Chicago White Sox lineup right now. And yeah, the Red Sox are in the market for a catcher, something the Chicago White Sox now find themselves with an overabundance of supply there. There is a demand for it. You've got the supply. They've got like 5 top-end catchers. 3 of them are on their 40-man roster, plus 2 prospects waiting in the wings down in the minor league system. If they're willing to take a Edgar Quero or perhaps a Corey Lee in exchange for Abreu, I think that would probably be a really solid trade for Chicago. And then, of course, that's not even bringing up, we've already talked about it before, but Nick Castellanos would be an excellent 1 to 2 year type of player to just throw out there while we wait for some of the prospects to work their way up to the major league roster. Another bit that we learned from part of that interview was the Chicago White Sox still in the market for starting pitching. Chris Getz said as much, and then it was also leaked earlier on in the day, which is what prompted the question to be asked by John Heyman of ESPN, talking about there are still teams seriously considering adding starting pitchers with 2 weeks left to go before they report. The White Sox mentioned directly by name in his tweet. Now, obviously, that's not really a shock to anyone that has been following this channel or White Sox news in general for some time now. The White Sox just have not done nearly enough to address that position to this point, and there's still a lot of guys out there that we've heard rumblings of over and over again. Chris Bassett, Lucas Giolito, a reunion there. Zach Littell, Justin Verlander, and Max Scherzer suddenly popped up not that long ago as potential options. But now we've heard it directly from an ESPN insider, and then Chris Getz himself in back-to-back days certainly adds a lot more smoke to the potential fire that the White Sox could be adding yet another starting pitcher before free agency period ends. I think that would certainly go a long way towards helping some excitement for this White Sox season. You got Murakami, you got some relief pitchers now. If you can get another outfielder to replace Luis Robert, you've got some assembly going here toward a competent, competitive major league roster. But right now, they've only got 3 solidified starting pitchers, and that's just not going to do it. That's just not going to be good enough to really threaten anyone down the stretch of a long MLB season. So to add maybe one other big-time starting pitching name to this roster, I think would really help any prospects towards creating more buzz and more excitement for this 2026 White Sox season. And then speaking of some buzz and excitement about the Chicago White Sox and potentially the future of the Chicago White Sox, an interesting name popping up on an ESPN list of the best prospects to miss the top 100 MLB pipeline list, and listed on there a guy that hasn't really been named a great deal when talking about the top end prospects for the White Sox. It was certainly an interesting name to come up. William Bergoya, an infield prospect for Chicago, a guy with great contact ability, very fast, a good base stealer, a good defender, but he ranks 12th by MLB Pipeline just in the Chicago White Sox farm system. There's been over 10 top 100 prospect lists that have come out from various different baseball sources, including MLB Pipeline, ESPN, CBS, NBC Sports, MLB.com, just a whole heaping pile of top 100 lists. He hasn't appeared on a single one, so very interesting to see his name appear on ESPN's list here and talking about the contributions that they expect from him in the near future. Actually ranked ahead of some other White Sox prospects that have been making other top 100 lists, like Sam Antonucci, like George Wolkow, guys that I think a majority believe to be the higher end top prospects for the White Sox right now. So, just something interesting to take note of. Bergoya getting some respect from ESPN in their article here. And it could be an interesting prospect to look forward to as the years, kind of pan out and as the future continues to approach. And we'll end things off here with one final tidbit as far as the Chicago White Sox future once again. Very interesting comparison that the Chicago White Sox made towards one of their young pitchers, as Chris Getz in that same press conference talked about some of the young players that he's most excited for, and he mentions by name Grant Taylor, who some of us thought might have been competing to be the closing pitcher for the Chicago White Sox this year. It was later revealed it was probably going to be more Leashore. Then they end up, making a whole bunch of signings. Looks like Grant Taylor just continues to fall lower and lower down the pecking order to be that closer. A lot of guys, or a lot of fans, were really still hoping that he would potentially get his shot to be a starting pitcher for the Chicago White Sox, considering how much starting experience he had down in the minor leagues to this point. That has been really a majority of his development down there has been as a starter. He's got the injury worries. We all know that. But Chris Getz mentioned today that, obviously this kind of hints towards that not being the case in the Chicago White Sox front office and in their leadership group. Specifically comparing him to that he sees him in the Mason Miller mold as far as back-end relievers that can add a lot of upside to the White Sox going forward. Mason Miller, obviously a strong name to throw out there to compare one of your young, bright pitchers to. Miller, a guy who had a phenomenal close to last season after being traded to San Diego from the Athletics. Ended up with an ERA under 1 in his half season there with San Diego. Just fantastic stuff. His overall season ERA, even with the slightly lesser first half of the season with the Athletics, still came to 263, 249 the year before that. I mean, he's just been a guy that has just been dominating batters at the back end of that Athletics and then San Diego bullpen, a guy that was on my fantasy team last year, and I certainly recognize his efforts quite a bit. A strikeout king in Mason Miller, a guy that had overwhelming fastball and the ability to miss the bat, and to receive a direct comparison like that from your general manager has to feel good if you're Grant Taylor, a guy whose ERA right now not exactly blowing people away, but the tools certainly are. You can see he's a guy that right now his fastball is in the 97th percentile across Major League Baseball. His spin rate is in the 98th percentile among Major League Baseball. He's a guy with phenomenal stuff and phenomenal raw natural ability. If he can put it all together the way the White Sox are hoping, then he probably will become one of the best back-end relievers in all of baseball. But that'll do it for White Sox Daily again today. Let us know your thoughts on anything we talked about in today's video. Who would you like to see the White Sox pursue as an additional starter? And how would you feel about either of those potential outfield trades? Let us know down below, and we'll see you guys next time.